She hasn't seen this beach in decades. The last time she was here, she was small enough to fit in your hand. Since then, she's crossed thousands of kilometers of open ocean. And somehow, after all those years, she found her way back. But how? Decades earlier, on this very same beach, her journey began beneath the sand. Dozens of eggs were hidden beneath the sand. And in the darkness below the beach, something strange was beginning to happen. One by one, the shells began to crack, but the hatchlings didn't escape the sand alone. Together, they pushed their way upward through the collapsing sand above them. Finally, the first tiny hatchlings reached the surface. Suddenly, strange movements began to stir across the beach. Dozens of newborn loggerhead turtles, each small enough to fit in the palm of a human hand, began making their way toward the water. But even reaching the water was a desperate race for survival. There was nowhere for them to hide on the open beach. Danger was always waiting. Crabs waited along the sand. Predators could strike from above. And for a hatchling this small, even the distance between the nest and the ocean seemed enormous. Still, she kept moving. Using her tiny flippers one after another, she crossed the sand toward the brightest part of the horizon. Around her, the other hatchlings were making the same journey. Some reached the water before she did. Others, unfortunately, would never make it there at all. Finally, after crossing the last stretch of wet sand, the first wave reached her. For the first time in her life, the unfamiliar water began pulling at her tiny body. She had survived the dangers of the beach. But the beach was only the beginning. Because beyond those waves was a world far larger and far more dangerous than anything she had faced before. Out in the open ocean, the little turtle disappeared from sight. And for many years, what happened next remained one of the great mysteries of her life. Scientists called them the lost years. Far from shore, she traveled with the currents, surrounded by a world that never truly stood still. As night slowly gave way to morning, something began to appear ahead. Small patches of sargassum drifted near the surface. At first, there were only a few. But soon, the scattered pieces became a floating habitat, alive with tiny fish, shrimp, and other creatures hidden among the branches. For a turtle this small, sargassum offered more than shelter. It was also a place to find food. Here, she could feed, rest, and remain hidden in the vast open ocean. For a moment, this floating world seemed safe. Then, the small fish around her began to disappear into the vegetation. Something else had entered the water nearby. A larger fish moved through the blue. Slowly, it came closer. And this time, the little turtle was no longer simply exploring. She was about to learn another rule of survival. The larger fish moved closer. The little turtle slipped deeper into the sargassum, disappearing between the branches. For an animal this small, survival wasn't about fighting. It was about not being seen. The larger fish passed by, and she survived. But the ocean would test her again. Because out here, everything was a matter of blue survival. Currents carried her across open water. Storms scattered her floating habitat. Predators appeared without warning. But still, she kept moving. Years passed. Her shell grew larger, her body grew stronger. And slowly, the tiny hatchling that had entered the ocean began to disappear. In her place was a young sea turtle. One afternoon, she was feeding near the surface. The ocean seemed calm, but something was moving below. A shadow rose from the deeper water. A tiger shark. The young turtle saw it and dove. The shark followed. There was nowhere to hide now. For the first time, survival wasn't about disappearing. It was about speed. She pushed deeper into the blue, but the shark was gaining on her. Then, ahead, something appeared through the water. A place to escape. If she could reach it first. She was almost there. The shark closed in behind her. At the last moment, she pulled her flippers close. The shark couldn't follow. For a few seconds, she stayed completely still, safe. But she couldn't stay there forever. When the water outside finally grew quiet, she emerged and continued on. By now, the ocean had taught her something important. Survival wasn't about being the strongest. Sometimes it was knowing when to run and where to go. But her journey was beginning to change. The open ocean had carried her for years. Soon, it would be time to leave it behind. Years passed, and the young turtle grew, larger, stronger, until the little turtle we had followed across the ocean was no longer young. She was an adult now. And after decades at sea, something was pulling her back, toward land, toward a coastline she had not seen since the night she was born, the same place where her journey had begun. Slowly, she left the ocean behind and climbed onto the sand. But she hadn't come all this way by accident. There was a reason she had returned. She had come back to lay her own eggs. She buried them beneath the sand, in the same place where her own life had begun. Then, weeks later, the sand began to move. One tiny hatchling appeared, then another, and another. A new generation was beginning its journey. And among them, one tiny turtle made her way toward the waves. She reached the water and disappeared into the ocean. Her mother's journey had brought her back to where it all began. But for this little turtle, the story was only beginning. And beyond those waves, a whole new lifetime was waiting.